Hey, this is Maggie, and I'm doing my vlog on Thomas Jefferson and the Wall of Separation Between Church and State by Daniel Driesbach. Here's a little bit of information on who Daniel Driesbach is to help give us an idea of why he would have wrote a book on this metaphor and its relations with the First Amendment. So currently he is a professor in the Department of Justice and Law and Criminology at the American University. His research interests include American constitutional law and history, First Amendment law, church-state relations, and criminal procedure. He earned his JD at the University of Virginia, his Doctor of Philosophy from Oxford, and his bachelor's at the University of South Carolina. According to Daniel Driesbach, in Thomas Jefferson and the Wall of Separation Between Church and State, he states that this metaphor actually fails to distinguish between the debated concepts surrounding the religious clause of the First Amendment, specifically separation and non-establishment, while tracing the history of the amendment and the use of the metaphor. So first, I believe it's important to look at the First Amendment's intended interpretation while defining what separation and non-establishment mean. First, the definition of separation is that the federal government would not be involved at all with any type of religion. And then the definition of non-establishment is that the federal government would not be tied to an official church. Think the Anglican Church in England, which the U.S. had just recently broken away from. Because of the debate between those advocating for separation and those for non-establishment, the First Amendment was slightly vague by not placing this wall of separation between church and state, but affirmed a restraint on the federal government in this regard. Another important thing that Dreisbach notes regarding crafting the First Amendment is that it was not originally intended to apply to the states, but only the federal government. He then turns his attentions to Jefferson's First Amendment interpretation, specifically the use of this metaphor in the famous Danbury letter. Unlike the vagueness of the First Amendment, which appeased both sides of the religious debates, Jefferson suggested a greater degree of separation between the federal government and any aspect of religion. Think worship and just the gathering of believers, official churches, religious laws, and morality being imposed upon others. As Dreisbach notes, Jefferson would likely have advocated for this religious separation in state governments as well. Now, one interesting thing that Dreisbach also does, instead of just looking at the differences between the original intent of the First Amendment and Jefferson's interpretation of the First Amendment, is looking at the implications of Jefferson's interpretation on the First Amendment later on in the future. Well, at least for us in the past. So, while Jefferson leaned towards separation, Dreisbach believes that Jefferson's beliefs on this matter were misinterpreted by later legal decisions. Oddly, the Danbury letter was used as a legal basis for a strict separation of church and state beginning in 1879 in a trial involving a Mormon and anti-bigamy laws. Incidentally, Dreisbach assumes that Jefferson's metaphor influenced the use of the 14th Amendment to apply towards the First Amendment in relations to state and local governments. In conclusion, I want to summarize this book and offer some of my thoughts. To summarize, Dreisbach used this book to trace the history of separation between church and state with a focus on Jefferson's famous metaphor. Honestly, I expected this book to focus more on Jefferson's religious beliefs, but I also believe that this book is important, especially in regards to understanding the contentious separation of church and state that continues to be debated in the U.S. today.